Okay, here we are. Welcome back to Feel the Force. And here again we have Georgios with us. And today we're going to talk about a very prominent figure in spirituality, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, also known as Osho. And if you've seen the Netflix documentary on Osho, you'll know that he was a very prominent guru in his time. And he created a commune full of followers who pretty much worshipped him like a god. And he had a very materialistic aspect. He's known famously for his 16 odd Rolls Royces, being very materialistic. And in this Netflix documentary, he's sort of exposed as having a sort of dark charisma and a bit of a shadow in spite of his followers loving him and so forth. And so just to kick off, Georgios, I wondered if Osho had any sort of malefic planets in his chart that would have influenced this kind of behavior and way of life.
Yeah, I think you introduced it pretty well. Pretty much everything you said right there is very clearly to be seen in his chart. Now, every time I try to understand why a person behaves in a certain way, I want to look at their parents first. And the parents, of course, are represented by the mother, which is the moon, and the father, which is the sun. And in his case, the mother must have been a really horrible mother, because it's in the worst position possible. It cannot be any worse. It's in Moon, Capricorn, conjunction Saturn in the 8th house. So every single position, house is the most difficult, the 8th. Sign is the most difficult, Capricorn, and planet is the most difficult, Saturn. So the mother must have been an absolute bully, or someone who just is extremely traumatized, someone who just doesn't care about his feelings or anything. Now, that explains a little bit of him, simply because the mother is internalized. That's why we see it in the chart. The character, the way of relating to the emotions becomes the mother. And in here, the Moon, Capricorn, Saturn is like, I feel something, but I must not act on it. I must control, and I must restrict. And as soon as something comes up and it tells me, oh, you feel like this, so do this, the subconscious mind says, no, don't go there, because mother told you don't go there. So you cannot. In later life, of course, it can be changed, but it goes so deep because it's our roots, the moon. The mother is the most deepest aspect of the personality. So it's very difficult to overcome that. The personality will structure the life around it. So in this case, the life would be structured around trying to obtain things materially, making sure that everything in the earth element Capricorn is right as rain, because that would be the only way possible for him to regulate the way he feels internally. Because he's simply taught and brainwashed very early, very strongly, do not act on your feelings. So if you want to know if this is like a dark triad indicator, like a dark personality, I would say this is a psychopathy indicator in the chart.
Right. It's on his part.
Placement. It doesn't mean the person is bad for having that placement. It just means that they are taught very early on that psychopathy is a survival adaptation, because it's necessary for the mother.
Yeah.
That was in the chart, yeah.
Yeah, well, that really makes sense, because the way he teaches, he's very he has a very penetrating gaze, and like he's like X-raying through you and sees through you. And in his autobiography, he claims that he was enlightened at age 15, 16, and had this sort of enlightenment experience. And there's a sort of
you have
yeah.
a lot of people talking in the background. It's quite loud.
Yeah, we could pause this and then resume in a minute.
Maybe
How's that?
A bit until the noise is gone.
Yeah. Should we do that?
Oh no.
Yeah, exactly.
Finally, so loud.
Yeah, it's best if we pause it and then resume in a bit. How's that?
Yeah. We are back.
So yeah, essentially he had this very penetrating gaze, and like he could see through you, but there was a sort of cosmic impersonalism there. And I was wondering if that impersonalism was a sort of trauma adaptation, you know.
Certainly.
Sort of, yeah.
There's a lot of control with how you feel with him. And it's in the 8th house, which is the power, which is the house of being consumed by other forces or trying to obtain power somehow. It has a lot to do with purifying the emotions and trying to be like really above and beyond the feelings. It is definitely in the chart. And the other thing is the father, which also contributes to that, because the father is a 7th house sun in his chart. The sun in the 7th house means that the father must have been an absent figure. Must have been very weak, or somehow he just didn't assert himself. He didn't know what he wanted, and he always gave in to the mother and to the child. This is kind of sun, especially. Sun is also unaspected. There's no aspect with the moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars. There's a trine of Jupiter and Uranus, and there's an inconjunct with Saturn and Chiron, which means the tension does indeed come from the mother, because the mother is the Saturn, and the Chiron in his chart is probably the giving up on that which the mother was trying to suppress. So the father cannot provide a functioning role model for him, and therefore he would have no values, no functioning value system. Without that value system, he would be floating in air. This is a very chameleon chart. So you would just adapt to whatever other people are doing, and you would not assert yourself. And keep it in mind that he has Mars conjunction Sun at the same time, which is usually a personality that very much asks for what we want. But here, it will be in the background, and he's trying to get what he wants through other people, because it's in the 7th house of other people. So it explains a cult mentality. This is very, very common for CEOs, for people who are in charge of a group, who are very charismatic, because a 7th house stellium, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and Sun, 4 planets, in the 7th house means this is a people person through and through, and this is how he gets what he wants accomplished in his life.
Wow, that's amazing. You mentioned the chameleonic aspect, but similar to what we covered in Alan Watts and his teaching method, and trying to pander to what the people want. And in his teachings, a lot of what he says is contradictory. He says one thing, and then in another lecture, he says something.
He says what other people want here.
Yeah.
Which is also very similar, again, to Alan Watts. And so it makes sense, right? That's how you get popular. Just tell them what they want, change things up.
But for like a serious follower of what he's saying, it can get very confusing. So you don't know really what his message really is.
Because which is difficult. Doesn't have a father, doesn't have a message himself.
Yeah.
That's what it means. Yeah. When the father is not there in person's chart, they don't have any message of their own. They have to learn it through very, very hard work of overcoming these karmic imprints that the person has. They usually find it through religion, or some kind of belief, or a group setting.
Yeah, and archetypally, you could say he has a bit of a trickster side, even. That I don't know how that shows up in the chart, but
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about it.
because
For one
that's
thing,
Mercury, isn't it? The trickster.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. You're looking at Mercury, right?
Yeah.
So what does Mercury has? Mercury has square Neptune as, no, sorry, Uranus. Actually, Mercury square Uranus. So this is someone who bends a lot what he thinks to adjust it to what the collective wants, which is what Uranus is about. It's about peer pressure. Peer pressure affects Mercury very strongly. Another placement is Mercury conjunction Pholus. Now, this is something people don't normally talk about, but Pholus is an asteroid that is like an impotent Mars. Imagine you have a Mars without a dick. And
Right.
the Mercury person is affected by the way they think, the way they get what they want, the way they communicate to others. It's like a very, I do not want to say cowardly, but Pholus is a cowardness indicator. It makes a person very shy, very afraid of stepping on other people's toes, so to say. So they readjust the way they communicate to accommodate that. So this is a chameleon type indicator. And the other indicator is that his Mercury is conjunction Venus, which I have. I have that conjunction. So this is the compulsive goodness disorder syndrome. Like I know a lot of other Venus conjunction Mercury people, and they have this problem. They're always smiling at you. They're always like, yeah, I agree. I can see why you're saying that. Totally, we are in alignment. It's just very harmonious. And sometimes it's harmonious is this, it can stab the person in the back because then they're betraying what they're actually thinking and they're not letting the other person know that.
Yeah. And in terms of business and practicality, he completely, what's the word? Not allocated. Well, he gave all the responsibility to this secretary called Sheila, who was very, very manipulative and worked behind the scenes to kind of corrupt everything almost. So, in a sense, he didn't feel like guilty for having done what he did, but in a way, he abnegated responsibility to this other person who didn't have, the best interest of the followers at heart.
Well, that's very convenient for him.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And you can see that in the chart as well. Because there's two placements that actually represent what you're saying. The person has trouble taking responsibility for managing their finances, which is very simple to see. He has Chiron conjunction Taurus. So Taurus is about managing your finances, your physical matters, your physical needs. Chiron shows where we give up on those needs. What aspect of our life are we just so uncomfortable with? We feel impotent to take control of that area. And we have to heal that aspect of ourselves. And sometimes this healing doesn't take place, and the person will use other methods to get this regulated. So he simply delegated another person to take care of that aspect in his life, which he could not manage, because he felt afraid that it would all fall apart if he takes charge of it, because that is how it is with this placement. And the other placement is that he has Pluto in the second house. Pluto shows the repression, where we feel guilty, what we're trying to hide. Sometimes people have this placement if they're afraid of physical possessions, they're afraid of accumulation and using the desire to earn money to get money. And either they go from one extreme, which is total abstinence, or they go to the other extreme, which is totally like, okay, I need to get rich because it's never, I never feel like it's enough. So where you go with those two aspects, showing that why he wouldn't take responsibility for that. I mean,
Yeah.
we can talk about these placements. In essence, it just shows that the person has their challenges.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, yeah, he did encourage, orgies, and he made, had sex with his students, and yet he would have, long periods of complete abstinence. So it was like complete
Trying to
pendulum swing,
regulate his guilt.
the regulation of guilt.
It's haunting him, yes. He has Pluto opposition Moon, which means the mother was a pathological guilt tripper. It can also mean that the mother was simply someone who was controlling him, constantly telling him what to do, how to behave. So his subconscious will replicate that. So he will do it to himself. And this is how he can manage it, to compensate for it.
That's so interesting. And the fact that he managed to, form a whole loyal commune seems to me like he was trying to extend or replace a family that he never had.
That's right. Yeah, that's very well observed. I mean, if you look for the family in the chart, you look at two things. You look at the moon, you look at the fourth house, and you look at the sign of Cancer. Sorry, three things. And well, he has Juno conjunction Pluto in Cancer. So somehow he's looking for a mother in some way or form. I mean, he obviously didn't have a mother. His mother was just a failure, according to the chart.
Yeah.
So the other problem is with Neptune in the fourth house. Neptune shows us illusions, things where we get blurred. I like to say from a psychologist perspective, it's where our mind goes blank. Like we look at this area and our mind is like, no, leave my body, leave it now. Like we dissociate, basically. We dissociate, or on the other hand, if we can heal that aspect and we get extremely psychic about that aspect, we get very, very good in recognizing this in our life. And this is the fourth house in his chart, so he'd be very, very good in recognizing where he finds family, where he gets the nourishment that he needs, the archetype of a mother, how he can establish that in his life on one hand, and on the other hand, he'll have difficulty actually having boundaries with other people, knowing when they are his family or not his family. So he tries to include everyone into this family structure if he does indeed not manage to overcome this boundarylessness. Because in his family, there was no boundaries according to this placement at all. So he would just replicate it in other relationships. So you could say, you could see a lot of his teachings in his chart in that way, because a lot of his spiritual stuff you can see in the water element houses. And he has all the difficult placements for healing that he needs to heal in the water element houses. The water element houses 4, 8, and 12 are the spiritual houses where we take care of spiritual matters. And if a spiritual guru has these houses occupied as he does, then it's very obvious that he's using his spirituality to heal himself. Yes, Moon, Saturn 8th house, 12th house Chiron, which is the womb wound, by the way. The 12th house is the womb. So this is someone who never feels quite safe in the physical world. He tries to use religion or imagination to find that safety.
That's fascinating, because a lot of his guided meditations are dynamic meditations. So a lot of movement and screaming and shouting and almost like trauma releasing. And also when you mentioned the womb thing, one of his meditations was imagine you're sucking on a nipple, basically. And that's a bit obvious in terms of, the whole womb thing that hasn't been fully, resolved. And creating his own dynamic meditations, not only to heal himself, but to also project onto his commune / family, almost. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a very good point, yeah. You also, what you said about screaming, because we didn't discuss it earlier. Where do you find it in this chart? I would say it's Pholus conjunction Mercury.
Which one? Sorry?
Pholus.
Okay.
Now, I mentioned earlier, this is where we feel crippled and impotent on one hand, but every time you feel one way, always imagine the opposite is just as likely to be the case. So never just look at one polarity for any placement. The other polarity of Pholus is that of explosion, that of intense release. Imagine a volcano. A volcano doesn't erupt for sometimes thousands of years. There's nothing happening at all. And then suddenly, boom, explosion. So that's maybe explaining his screaming. Suggestions. He's trying to get that Pholus Mercury expressed there.
Yeah. And, of course, he was, arrested, a couple of times, really. And it's suspected that he was poisoned, basically. And, yeah, sorry about the noise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. Also, to what extent does the rejection of his Lilith impact on how he expressed himself within that commune?
So he had Uranus there. But it's not a conjunction. It's, however, it's let me see. No, it is a conjunction actually. You're right. It is Lilith conjunction Uranus. Now that's interesting because both of these planets aspects, they are about rejection. Uranus is about what we detach from. We detach from things because more often than not, we reject them. So we try to compensate for that. Now, Lilith here, on one hand, Lilith is rejected, exiled from paradise. So she has rejection. And Uranus is rejected by being above the earth, the sky, rejected from Gaia, from Mother Gaia, from that tit, that primordial womb. It has separated itself, individuated. So the problem with him is he's rejecting his own individuation in that sense that he feels like he cannot be outside of the collective. He has to be one with the collective. And that's how Lilith operates on Uranus. On the other hand, because both planets are conjunctions of it's like a tug of war. This planet tries to overwhelm that, and this with that. So Uranus is about him rejecting that he was rejected in the first place. So he may have difficulty dealing with abandonment. And this problem in the 11th house, which is the house of friends, hopes, and dreams, this is usually very, very common for a person who has a flat attachment style. So someone who doesn't attach to anything or any person. They're just trying to always keep a distance.
Interesting. Okay.
This is also, if you want to know about dark triad in connection to that, it's also a psychopathy indicator, just like the sun in the 7th house, the moon conjunction Saturn Capricorn in the 8th house, and this one. So he has a lot of those indicators actually. If you see so many indicators all at the same time, there's probably something going on, because you got to handle all these energies. So you have to be a certain way.
Yeah.
Unless you're very evolved, which you know.
Yes. Speaking of the tug of war between planets, according to the Vedas, the planets are basically embodied demigods almost, and they have their own personality. So they have their own energy that's kind of at war with each other or in harmony with each other. So in terms of the tension, I think we touched on before this call between Chiron, Saturn, and the Sun, and that influencing the sort of need to kind of numb himself, basically.
Right.
For instance, Alan Watts, before giving a lecture, would drink vodka. In the case of Osho, before giving a lecture, he would do nitrous oxide, which is a laughing gas. So in a way, there's a sort of substance use in order to actually be, let's say, functional. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
regular.
don't know. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
That's the word you're looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
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 But the thing, it looks like he has a yacht, Chiron, Saturn, and what was the other one? Wait a second. So he has Chiron in conjunct Sun. So that means he has problems with centering himself, focusing on his own identity. He's constantly battling with himself over the course of his life. How do I identify myself? Where am I? And this is much more problematic when you have this in conjunction with his ascendant, which is in Gemini, which is pretty much the same energy,
So
going
what is
back and forth, going between this personality and that personality. So it doesn't help. He lacks grounding in this sense. So he needed something to keep it down or regulate it. But there's so many aspects in his chart that just make it more and more difficult to get that done.
Yeah.
He also has one more thing. He didn't only have Pholus conjunction Mercury, but also Pholus conjunction Mars. So it means the Mars principle is also blocked. And it's so close to the Sun, one could say maybe it's affecting the Sun at the same time, which is the identity. So, because Mars is about purification, getting what you want, also healing yourself as well, it's more difficult when you have so many planets just suppressing each other one after another. You have Moon square Lilith, opposition Pluto. You have Mercury square Uranus. You have Venus square Uranus. You have all these inconjuncts between the Sun, Saturn, Chiron, Jupiter. It's just a very, very heavy chart. There's just a lot of things not working in the person's favor.
What stands out for you the most as an astrologer?
Yeah. Well, it's just the seventh house, I think. It's just the seventh house stellium and the 11th house, a lot of placements there as well, with Nessus, Uranus, Lilith, North Node, and Aries, all in the 11th house. This is a people person to such a huge degree. It's just a CEO. It's just, there's two problems that he faces. One problem is he gets his needs met through other people. That's what Chad is saying. It's just how it is. If you have so much energy focus on other people, that's the chart. And the other problem is there's too many planets trying to block each other or work together. It's just a clusterfuck from the right side. Above the 7th house, it's just all on top of each other. And it's not
Yeah.
very good because it's just too much access on one area of life. I don't personally like that. It also means a person gets extremely good at it, but
Yeah.
it's because they have to get good at it. That's the reason.
Yeah.
An adaptation.
So in a way, he did the best he could with a pretty bad bargain.
He did pretty well. All things considered, he did very well. But you can judge it any way you want. You can say he's been a psychopath, just abusing other people, using them, which is what I would say, looking at the chart, which is the most likely scenario for me. Or he's someone who's just very, very selfless. He's just a saint, and he's doing everything because he loves people. He just wants them to be happy.
Yeah.
Whatever story you're buying, I will watch this one.
It's fascinating because it's totally 6 of 1/2. Many people, like him. Other people say he was,
It's either a saint or a psychopath. It's very polarizing, this chart.
Completely. Yeah. And that's what keeps the mystery or the enigma sort of alive and intriguing. And, even after his passing, he's still a fascinating figurehead, history and spirituality.
Yeah. I would be, that's why I would be careful to judge a person and completely say, okay, this is 100% what they are.
Yeah.
I can only look at the chart and say, okay, the chances for them being that way, they're very high because all these planets are saying that. That's all I can say for sure. If I was more experienced, let's say, give me 10 years, reading 1,000 more charts, I would say it's even more likely that this is the case or that's the case. But for now, I give it to the audience.
Yeah, totally.
What to believe.
Well, yeah. Well, that leaves it up to you as to whether was he a saint or a psychopath. There you go, or a bit of both. But there we go. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add? You good?
I think that's a pretty good ending.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. And yeah, I'll put your links below if you wanted to add anything in terms of your services of astropsychology, birth charts, soul charts, etc. And that would be awesome.